Why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. In celebration of Fair Housing Month, the Howard County Association of Realtors, also known as HCAR, has filled this month full of educational and interactive opportunities in fair housing. But before I share with you what you are in store for this evening, we would like to thank our social justice sponsors for their support during Fair Housing Month. That's Rachel Oslin with Lone Star Inspection Services, Sarah Anderson, Maryland Real Estate Network, and John Von Paris with Von Paris Moving and Storage. We're ending the month with this collaborative webinar, The State of Fair Housing Today. Together with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Legislative Committees and the Fair Housing Committee, we will discuss and debate the legislation at the local, state, and national level as it concerns fair housing and its effects on equal housing opportunity. We will analyze these governmental policies to understand why the law was passed or not passed, its purpose, the anticipated outcomes, and unintended consequences from various perspectives. We will also talk about best practices for realtors so that we can provide equal professional services. I believe that you are in store for a vigorous discussion and welcome your participation. Only through engaging in this type of dialogue can we live a more fair and equitable society, eliminating divisions and the wealth gap. So I thank you again for being here. My name is Kim Williams, and I'm a realtor at Sampson Properties and chair of the HCAR Fair Housing Committee. I've been a licensed practicing real estate agent for 8 years, and I'm proud to continue my mom's legacy. My mom, Margaret Bass, was a trailblazer in her own right as being a Black-owned female broker during the 70s, Adams and Bass Realtors, where I worked as a teenager. And my dad, David Bass, was a civil rights activist. My mom used to always tell me that I can't cure the problems of the world. I can't change the world. But if my mom and dad were here today, I would thank them for preparing me for a day such as this, because I do believe that change is possible. So I pray that each and one of you have an open mind as we discuss the reality of discrimination that exists in our society today and the laws that have been established to prevent housing discrimination. Our speakers today will cover legislative hot topics in this market where potential for discrimination and violations have been escalating. New and upcoming laws will be changing how you do business. And we need to know what the impact of these laws on housing opportunity are on our communities. So just to go over a few housekeeping rules. You can place all your questions and comments in the chat box or during Q&A, and we will address those appropriately during the panel discussion, as well as during the open Q&A session at the end. Now, before we talk about the state of fair housing today and introduce our speakers, I would like to talk about how we got here and the significance of fair housing and the Fair Housing Act. So the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development established April as National Fair Housing Month. We would like to thank you all for joining us as we celebrate 54 years of the Fair Housing Act. This is so very important to us because the Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and family status. Congress passed the Fair Housing Act on April 11, 1968, only because of the pressure inflicted by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that occurred after he was assassinated on April 4, 1968. The National Association of Realtors states that the Fair Housing Act declares a national policy of fair housing throughout the United States. The law makes illegal any discrimination in the sale, lease, or rental of housing, or making housing otherwise unavailable because of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. Now, although the passage of this very important legislation was a major accomplishment to address racial discrimination in housing in America, we still have a very long journey ahead. I'm extremely pleased to share with you the efforts of the Howard County government's renewed commitment to join with HCAR by signing an executive proclamation on April 1st, 2022 by Calvin Ball, the Howard County executive. I was there with the county executive, Calvin Ball, who expressed his dedication to, quote, transformative solutions that offer fair and equal housing opportunities to all, unquote. I thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. Now I would like to introduce my partner in moderating, Kimberly Smark, with Movement Mortgage, our Fair Housing Committee co-chair. So Kimberly, I'm turning it over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Smark and I'm with Movement Mortgage. I've been in the industry since '98. I actually have a background of processing loans, some junior underwriting, and started originating in 2005. So I've got a lot of big experience in our industry and have seen such fluctuation in everything that's gone on over the last several years. I am part of the Fair Housing Committee and I've been a part for the last 3 years or so since we started. The first thing that I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce each of our speakers and give each one an opportunity to speak for about a minute, just to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. The first person that I'd like to introduce is Cleveland Horton. He's with Keller Williams, and he is the committee chair, the DEI committee chair. Cleveland?
Good afternoon, Kim and Kim. This is the Kim and Kim show this afternoon. So again, my name is Cleveland Horton. I do serve as the DEI committee chair for the Howard County Association of Realtors. I also serve in the capacity of secretary. As Kim mentioned, I am also affiliated with Keller Williams Realty Center in Columbia. And I am also on the executive leadership team for the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. So it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon in all those different capacities, and looking forward to the engaging conversation that everyone has gathered information for today's discussion. So thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Cleveland. And next we have Steve Miller. He is with Cummings and Company. He is the legislative committee chair. Steve?
Thank you, Kimberly. That's pretty much my spiel. Steve Miller, I've been doing this now for 8 years. I'm a second generation realtor, coincidentally sitting in the same chair that my father sat in the 80s. So in my committee, we take a look at all the legislation that comes through and make suggestions and recommendations to both the board as well as Maryland Realtors and to their lobbyists as to what our opinions are. Our committee has to look at the bills in a very objective manner in which we have to consider all the unintended consequences. What does the bill seek to do? What does it seek to fix? What would happen as a result of it? And sometimes we kind of get into some spirited debates over, although we will be in the spirit of the legislation in favor, sometimes in the practice we aren't. And that does happen from time to time, and especially when we're dealing with important legislation like fair housing. We want to make sure that everyone is treated equitably. We want to make sure that everyone is treated equally, and we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to live in a home that they can afford without any fear of discrimination. So I appreciate the opportunity to give a little bit of the perspective from my committee, and looking forward to a great discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And next we have Erica Madden. She's an attorney with Universal Title. Erica?
Thanks, Kimberly and Kim. Thankfully, Stephen, Rich, and everyone out there. And I'm using my hands because so I am an attorney with Universal Title. I have been in the industry for 16 years, and I'm on HCAR's education, legislative, and fair housing committees. One of my biggest goals, I can say, throughout my career and more, as I'm getting up there in age, is to provide education to agents, and to everybody, but just to inform, educate, keep everybody out of trouble. And so that's what I think one of the reasons we do these webinars is to, I love being able to participate in them and provide any knowledge that I have learned, and then I always learn on these as well. So hope you guys get something to, get some education out of it.
Thank you for being
Thank you,
here.
Erica. And last we have Rich Green. He's mortgage officer over at Presidential Bank Mortgage. Rich?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is, as Kimberly said, is Rich Green. I'm with Presidential Bank Mortgage. In 2022, I am celebrating my 46th year in this industry. So I win.
Congratulations.
And I keep on going. I will tell you that I am on the HCAR Legislative Committee with Steve. I am a member of the HCAR board as well. But in addition to that, I am a past president of the Maryland Mortgage Bankers Association, and I'm co-chair of their legislative committee, which brings an interesting perspective to a lot of what we talk about. We oftentimes have the same objectives and goals in the legislation, and sometimes we don't. Because we look at it from a banking perspective, but we also look at it from, a consumer perspective as well. So that's really the reason why I enjoy doing this, to kind of marry both of them together, and hope to be able to bring that perspective to our discussion today.
Thank you, Rich. And we're going to bring Cleveland back out to speak. He's going to address the state of fair housing today. Cleveland?
Thanks for that, Kim. I appreciate it. So I guess I'm still getting over the comment by Erica that she's getting up in age. So I'm still trying to deal with that one. But I welcome the opportunity to come to you all this afternoon just to talk about some statistics on where we are from a fair housing perspective. The old adage around, men lie, women lie, the numbers don't. So we feel like it's a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the statistics that we see from a governmental standpoint in terms of fair housing. So I'd like to just kind of go over some stats, and just bear with me. I try not make it boring, right? I know it's late in the day. Many people have been at work all day or out there showing houses all day. So I want to make it as participatory as possible. So if you can chime into the chat and let's have a little fun with it. So we take a look at our stats for fiscal year 2021. I'd like for some people to chime into the chat and let me know what you all believe is the top category of complaints that we received from a fair housing standpoint. I'm gonna give you all like 15 seconds to do that. I see our president wins the award. President Sarah Anderson was the first one to hop in. So I see disability, I see staff applications. So when we take a look at our data for fiscal year 2021, disability was absolutely the top category for complaints. We received 169 complaints in the area of disability, primarily in the area of accessibility and reasonable accommodations. That number is up about 62%. In fiscal year 2020, we were at about 105. So you can see the drastic increase in the number of disability complaints that we received at the commission in fiscal year 2021. It dealt with a lot of disability issues related to assistance and support animals. Because of COVID-19, we're also seeing a lot of requests, reasonable accommodation requests coming in regarding respiratory issues that are now being exacerbated, and the requests for modifications of the HVAC or the filter modification systems for properties. The exceptions to visitor rules, we're starting to see an uptick in that, where people need more visitors because of the assistance and the medical care that they need to be able to fully use and enjoy their dwelling. The second category that we saw from a fair housing standpoint was race. We received 73 complaints of race discrimination in fair housing. That's up about 27%. In 2020, we were at about 53. It's also key to know when we talk about the race complaints that we receive, 96% of the complaints that we receive regarding race are from African Americans. So that's important to note as well. The third category is harassment. We received 60 complaints of harassment. That's up 330% from 2020. Right? We know that COVID-19 had a direct impact. 18 complaints of harassment in 2020 And again, we saw that drastic uptick to about 60 in 2021. We know that the majority of sexual harassment cases that we see at our agency typically occur in the rental market, where typically it's happening to single women who are being harassed by their landlord. The perpetrators appear to groom their victims by testing the boundaries. And it kind of starts small, like showing up unannounced for a maintenance request, things of that nature. And the perpetrators begin to gauge the tenant's vulnerability and begin to try and isolate them. So they ask questions about, do you have children? What's your personal relationship status? Family members? Do they live in the state? Things of that nature. They also create rules for female tenants, only like forbidding male visitors to come to the property and threatening eviction if they do have male visitors coming to their property. We also know that most victims of sexual harassment in housing choose not to report their experiences. Unlike many other categories, we know that housing has a direct impact on a number of different areas of life, where your children go to school, where you have access to good jobs and work, things of that nature. So many individuals are afraid to file complaints of fair housing because of the retaliation and losing their housing. The primary reason is that sexual harassment is usually perpetrated on persons in precarious housing situations, where somebody's doing them a favor, where they feel that they won't be able to get any additional housing, and they feel like the other person has the upper hand, so they're afraid to do anything to risk losing that particular housing. The affordable housing crisis limits the housing opportunities of people for low and moderate income levels, making them vulnerable to sexual predators. The next category I kind of briefly talked about was retaliation. We received 49 retaliation complaints in 2021, and that's up about 61%. In 2020, we had about 30, and again, now we're up to about 41. One of the things that we always talk about that we've seen in 2021 is that all of our categories across the board, we've seen significant increases. While we are glad that people are utilizing their rights to file complaints with us, we are leery as to where we are going as a state. As we continue to see retaliation complaints rising, as we continue to see harassment complaints rising as well, and disability complaints, it's important that we do our due diligence on the front line to make sure that all of our clients are aware of what their rights are should they be faced with a potential discrimination issue. So when we think about, one of the hot topics recently has been source of income. In 2021, we did receive 9 complaints of source of income discrimination. Now, we know that source of income is relatively new in our state, which is why it's still so low. We do anticipate that the source of income complaints that we receive will continue to drastically increase. And again, we know that's a hot topic across the real estate industry, and we'll continue to have conversations around source of income. It's key to note as well that the majority of source of income cases that we see are in the rental market. And examples of source of income discrimination that we've seen from our agency perspective is housing choice vouchers, commonly referred to as Section 8, housing assistance for veterans, Social Security, disability income, court-ordered child support, things of that nature. We are still seeing on a regular basis constant violations in the MLS, where individuals are still putting, we do not accept vouchers in the MLS. So we are constantly seeing these violations in the MLS as well. Most exemptions for source of income, because we always get the question, right? Well, I'm exempt. And we always tell people that most exemptions are lost once a seller or landlord utilizes the service of a broker, agent, or salesperson, right? In addition to that, most exemptions are also lost once you advertise in the way that is deemed to be discriminatory, right? So although while, on its face, you may have been exempted at one point in time, it's important for us to let our clients know, because once they engage us as licensed agents or brokers, they have lost that exemption. Again, we think about source of income. Source of income does not state that the seller cannot have criteria for rental, right? But what it does indicate, however, is that sellers must apply that criteria consistently and accurately to everyone, right? So one of the most common things that we see is when we're setting this rental criteria, and someone may say you need to have 3 times the income. But when you're dealing with someone that has a voucher, when you talk about 3 times the income that you can only apply to them is their required income. For an example, if someone is renting a property for $1,500 a month, If their voucher is for $1,200 a month, 3 times their income will be 3 times the $200 or $300 that they're required to pay every month, right? That's $600. When you apply the entire rental amount to them, then you have violated the source of income statute. So we need to be careful in terms of how we're applying and how we're analyzing people's application for rental, especially around the source of income piece, because it is vital as we continue to move forward. One of the other big issues that, and I'm sure we'll talk about later as we talk about some of the legislation, is the appraisal issue, right? Everybody's been hearing on the news about the appraisal biases and gaps, especially as it pertains to minorities. One of the things that we've really been reading and keeping abreast of, there's a recent NAFA study that was done, and it really talks about how historically, houses and communities have always been based on the neighborhood, and especially around an all-white neighborhood having the highest value, right? And the impact that that has had over time. When you think about literature and training in the appraisal system, you can go back to, all the language that has been used over time. In 1932, in the valuation of real estate materials, it states that there is one difference in people, namely race, which can result in very rapid decline in real estate values. In 1935, when you think about the American Institute of Real Estate Appraisers Manual, language in there indicated that to have the attributes of a good residential area, it is essential that protection be afforded against the infiltration of inharmonious racial groups, right? Speaking to minorities. In 1973, the American Institute of Real Estate Appraisers Course Manual and included language that states information on the percentage of native-born whites, foreign whites, and non-white populations is important. And the changes in this composition is significant. As a general rule, minority groups are found at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, and problems associated with minority group segments of the population can hinder community growth. This language has had a direct impact on what we see from an appraisal standpoint today. Now, can you find some of that same language in some of these same materials today? No, but the very systems that were created out of this language are still present today. There's a Brookings Institute that was done that looked at data between 2012 and 2016. And that study indicated that homes in majority Black neighborhoods had values that were 23% less than properties in mostly white neighborhoods. The same study estimated that as a result of that, homes in majority Black neighborhoods are undervalued by about $48,000 per home on average. This results in about $156 billion cumulative loss in value nationwide in minority neighborhoods. So we also talk about the method that's used for appraisals, right? The sales comparison approach predominantly utilized by appraisers today results in historically undervalued properties continue to undervalue minority neighborhoods. And again, what we're seeing is more and more people coming forward talking about the appraisal issues that they've seen. So we definitely want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that. One of the things that we know is that our clients have a lack of understanding of their rights to file a complaint about the appraisal. Fortunately, as people continue to get more and more educated by us and on their own, people are filing appeals and filing suits against appraisers as a result of this. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has created PAVE, which is the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. And even in doing that, HUD has identified that 15.4% of majority Latino neighborhoods and 12.5% of majority Black neighborhoods have seen that they have resulted in an underappraisal of their contract price, as compared to 7.4% of majority white neighborhoods. So it's important for us that we make sure that we continue to educate ourselves and our clients, that we stay diligent when we see things that do not appear to be right, that we are speaking up on behalf of ourselves and for our clients. Which moves me on to my last topic before I move on to continue to further the discussion. What role do we play as service providers in the real estate industry? I tell everybody that one of our primary roles is to ensure that individuals are protected from fair housing violations. And what does that mean? It means that you're protecting the public, that we're protecting brokers, that we're protecting buyers and sellers, and more importantly, we're protecting ourselves, right? So when we are out here performing our duties as real estate professionals, whether it be home inspectors, whether it be appraisers, lenders, agents, it is our duty to make sure that we are also protecting the Fair Housing Act. So if we see something, we should say something. Whether indirectly or directly, it is all of our responsibility to make sure that we are holding each other accountable. If we want to address fair housing, if we want to seek fair housing, continue to move forward, it is in our hands. It is up to us because we see it on the front lines. We have to be more diligent and hold each other accountable. We'll talk about how. One of the ways we do that is training, right? And one of the things that I've speaking out numerous times about and will continue to is that in Maryland, our continuing education requirement only has us required to attend 1.5 hours of fair housing training for renewal. 1.5 hours, right? That is completely unacceptable, right? We definitely need more fair housing training for our industry so that we can ensure that as we talk about fair housing and make fair housing a priority, that fair housing training also becomes a priority for our industry. Seek additional training, right? Outside of just the required training. There are a number of seminars and webinars and symposiums that go on, especially in April, which is Fair Housing Month, but even outside of April. I encourage all of you all to be more informed about fair housing so that you all can inform your clients and your fellow colleagues. Ask before, not after, right? I'm always available if something appears in your transactions that you feel is kind of iffy. I ask that you reach out to me or someone else that you know is very familiar with fair housing and ask them about it before you continue to move forward. We all know that our clients ask us to do a number of different things, but we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and not what was right just for our clients. So we do ask that you ask before you do something instead of just doing it and violating someone's fair housing rights. And lastly, I'll wrap it up by just simply saying, let's stop being silent. Many of us witness fair housing violations on a frequent basis, whether it's through conversations with other agents, whether it's as we're perusing MLS for our clients or whatever it may be. We need to ensure that we are holding each other accountable and educating each other through the process. I think that one of the best things that we can do is engage in conversations like this with each other so that we can ensure that we all fully understand what it means to be a fair housing advocate, to be a fair housing violator, right? And what it means simply to do the right thing as it pertains to fair housing, all right? With that, I think I've spent enough of your time. I'll pass it on to my other colleagues to continue with the conversation.
I'd like to point out something really quick. So the National Association of Realtors actually has several videos on their website regarding fair housing. It would be really important for everybody to take a look at that as well. I was watching one last night that was posted yesterday, had some really good content in there.
Yeah, and I know that Erica's probably going to talk about this a little later on, but the bias trainings and, you know, as continuing education. I know that the state of Maryland requires nurses to take bias training. And we've done, like last year, the Fair Housing Committee did a webinar that focused specifically on perceived biases. And so I don't know if you want to talk about that now, Erica, since it was brought up, but, you know, or wait till later. But I definitely agree with Cleveland that we should be seeking this out, and that, yes, we definitely need more continuing hours of training with fair housing. We have a contest that's been going on this entire month to encourage realtors to take the Fair Haven simulation. It walks you through different types of experiences that you could face as a real estate agent that deals with fair housing, and it has taught me a lot, even though I'm closer to this because I work with my colleagues and I am a fair housing advocate. But I encourage everyone to also take that, and that's on the National Association of Realtors website as well. I see Vicki has a hand raised. Can we chime Vicki in?
Vicki, you just put your comment in the chat if you can.
Yeah, and I think, Erica, you do teachings on this too, don't you?
I teach, yes, I guess I didn't mention that in addition to being on several committees, I also teach several CE classes, but I do continuing education on fair housing, legislative update, and the contracts. But I mean, I'll talk about it now. The bias training, there's not really much more to say. I think you basically said it all. But that what they're looking at is, and I do actually encourage, I read the Maryland Realtors magazines for information for when I teach. But they did this past month. I do recommend that everybody read it. It was really, educational, but they did a whole segment on fair housing. And one of the things that they discussed in there was the hope for bias training in real estate, that there were several other states. I know Pennsylvania, New York, I think they said California, I don't have it in front of me, but I know that there's several other states in the country who have instituted and require bias training in the education are required for realtors. Right now, the state of Maryland has it for healthcare providers. There's certain legislation out there that I know that they had said for, for other industries. There's nothing so far really that's been put out to the legislature for realtors, but they foresee that coming in the future. So stay tuned, or maybe it'll be, 3 hours, 4 hours of fair housing are added into there. But I think it is important, and Maryland Realtors does see the need for it. I think that's something that's being advocated for as well.
So, okay, thank you very much, Cleveland and Erica, for your input into that, as well. I think, Cleveland, you really laid out the foundation and gave us a good, a historical background and brought it up to date to the state of fair housing today. Really appreciate, your contribution, and I may be calling you too. So I definitely appreciate everything that you've mentioned. I actually pulled up the Brookings research as well, so I was following along with you as you were speaking. And that should lead us into our actually the bill that we wanted to discuss next. So Kimberly, you want to lead into that one?
Well, we actually have Steve Miller talking about a couple of the bills that are coming up. Some have, let me look at this here. One that's actually being kind of held by the state of Maryland in a task force, but really run off of the feds handling that.
So we're looking at
there
and evaluations.
I'm sorry.
Right. So to give you just kind of a brief overview, there are multiple bills and some that have been signed into law, as well as one that is actually sitting on the governor's desk. It'll most likely be a automatic acceptance, which would be the task force. So specifically referring to House Bill 1097 from this past legislative session that just finished, and this establishes a task force to study what are the historic appraisal gap issues that exist in the state. Now, as Cleveland mentioned and Kim and Kimberly both alluded to, there is some movement at the federal level on this, and appraisals and mortgage industry being federally regulated, there's a lot that can happen here. But what the state is doing is they're running different task forces. And to give you an idea, Maryland Realtors was in favor of 1097 with a couple minor amendments. Specifically, one of the things that came up in our legislative committee was that they only had folks from PG County represented there. And we felt that in order for it to be more equitable, we need to have folks from around the state as a part of this. So if you got into the legislature's website and you start, if you're a little bored and you want to read some text, you can start to see how these things work their way through. But in effect, the idea is that the governor will sign the bill, and the task force will deliver back to the governor's desk by the end of October of next year a report that states this is what has happened, these are the issues that we've identified, and this is what we would recommend to fix them. Concurrently with that, in last year's session, HB 1239, which was signed into law, actually creates a program that allows the state to provide funding to help fix the appraisal gap that existed prior to in red line districts. And the idea being, again, that we understand and we know and we recognize that there are certain areas that have been specifically disadvantaged historically. And because of the lack of investment that has come into them, now the cost of rehabilitating property has become that much more onerous to developers and property owners. So this bill 1239 specifically deals with developers working in low-income housing areas to build, new properties and do renovation work to existing that will help to boost the property values overall. Cleveland had mentioned the study that came back from the FHA, and in the testimony that our lobbyists at Maryland Realtors delivered on the first bill I mentioned, 1097, we did draw that into it and said, hey, we're looking forward to this. The feds have released their report. The state is working on theirs. We want to work with you to fix the problem, identify and fix the problem. And that's really where we are with a lot of these.
So just as an opinion, I just want to ask this to the group. So the Maryland House Bill 1097, which we are, briefly talking about, establishing the task force to study property appraisal and valuation equity, to study the misevaluation and undervaluation of property owned by minorities, and requiring a task force to report its findings, recommendations to the governor. And 2023 is when they're going to have that. So how are they going to go? Now, my first question is, how are they going to go about what's their measurements for this? I guess that's the first thing I want to ask. And why is it taking so long to, since this has been, happening within our industry? So that's the first thing is, why is it taking so long? And,
So, it takes a while for the amount of information to be digested and distilled into something that makes sense. And so, unfortunately, I often use the term moving at the speed of government, but the reality is that they're taking on a volunteer task force and asking them to go back through and evaluate this. Specifically, they want to, and I'm going to read the exact language here. They want to study strategies and actions that will help ensure that governmental oversight and industry standards and practices further valuation equity. They increase the training of appraisers to combat valuation bias, remove barriers to entry into the appraisal profession by minorities, and to assist in the development of a model for meaningful reconsideration of value process, which dovetails into what Cleveland mentioned about the appeals process. They also want to reduce or eliminate bias related to automatic valuation models. And our colleagues here in the mortgage industry are very familiar with automatic valuation, but that's where things are trending. So they basically put all the information into the computer spits out an automatic valuation model, which is completely irrespective of any outside influence. But the problem is, if you have historically lower property values, the data that they're using is not correct. Okay. The other part of this is to identify legislative or policy recommendations that will provide a comprehensive and coordinated approach for reducing bias and valuations through enforcement, compliance, and other methods. So the reality is, we don't want them to do this quickly. We want them to be methodical. We want them to be accurate. We want them to be thorough. And so if they move too quickly on this, unfortunately, the law of unintended consequences kicks back in, as I often say, and we miss something. And that missing could wind up being very, very damaging when this law and this task force is trying to create something good. So the idea is, we want you to take your time. We want you to figure it out. And to give you an idea, the other bill that I mentioned, 1239 from last year's session, that report is due back to the state sometime this summer. So generally speaking, a lot of these task forces, when they're dealing with this much information, they are going to take a year to a year and a half to work their way through so that they make sure they do it right.
I just wanted to add to that just a little bit. We think about, and one of the questions you asked Kim was, why is it taking so long? I think that when you think about from an appraisal standpoint, many people in minority communities have been crying foul as it pertains to appraisals for a very long time.
Yes. I
think that as we think about having more progressive leadership, right, and moving forward is why now you see this being brought to the forefront. I think that individuals in power, individuals who have benefited from the appraisal system, which typically tend to be, historically have been non-minorities, who actually, tend to own or have the majority of the power, haven't reacted to this in the way that we see now in recent times. So I'm glad to see all the task force being issued. We see it at the state level. We also see it at the federal level through the PAVE. They've actually issued an action plan. So I definitely urge everybody to go to HUD's website and download the PAVE action plan as it pertains to appraisals and appraisal bias. But I think, again, I've been in this space now for going on 16, 17 years, and this appraisal conversation is nothing new to me, but it's being new to the masses at this point. So I just think that because of, as we continue to move forward, and we have more and more progressive individuals, legislators, who are now willing to take these things up and identify these things and actually acknowledge them, right? Because the appraisal issues didn't just happen yesterday. They didn't just happen last year. They've been going on for quite some time. So even as you take a look at the task force, one of the things that we know, you can create 1 million task force, right? Unless you're willing to go in and change the system. The issues that we have today will be the same issues that my daughter and my grandsons and granddaughters at some point will be discussing, unless we're willing to actually go in and fix the system, which has created the biases and the issues that we see as it pertains to appraisals current day today.
Yeah, because how I see it is the implication is that for generations to come, if we don't make the change now, I mean, this is a direct effect on wealth and how minority families are able to generate wealth from generation to generation if they're suppressed because of discrimination due to evaluation and appraisals of their property.
And to add to that, what Cleveland and Kim just mentioned is that's where what was 2021's 1239 starts that process. So the state is looking at the overall with the task force, and they're already implementing things. And the hope is that when the report comes back from 1239 this summer, that we'll already be starting to move towards this. I mentioned that, specifically, it is a fund to help areas that had been redlined. Okay, so it's designed for developers to be able to obtain money, and there's specifics on what can be done as far as foundational repairs and flooring and everything else under the sun. But the point is, the state has put $4 million into this fund to start, and it will continue to contribute that allocation, or that appropriation rather, every year, so that as developers are coming into, and we could identify neighborhoods if we wanted to and just pick one out of random, they're coming in to build up houses there and to create wealth in the neighborhood. They can help be offset by the state's funds. And so we're working towards it. We're getting there. We're hitting it from several different angles at the same time. So all of it is a net good. It'll still be interesting to see what the state task force comes back with, given that it's more of a federal thing than it is a state thing. But it's good because then the state can then contribute their information to the feds and say, this is what we see, boots on the ground. And, to that extent, Baltimore was ground zero for redlining and restrictive covenants in the U.S. And even to this day, there are still neighborhoods in Howard County that had restrictive covenants, although they're now illegal. They do pop up in deed and title every once in a while, and I'm sure Erica could shed a little bit of light on that. I know of one in particular. I also know of the story that was done to get somebody in there on the sly, and good for her. So we had neighborhoods in Baltimore, like Roland Park, that specifically prevented African Americans and Jews from living there. It was just that simple. And that was in the covenants as recent as, I think it was, they were eliminated in the 60s with the Civil Rights Act, but that's not that long ago.
Right.
There are people on this Zoom right now that were alive when that was eliminated. So this is all stuff that has to continue to be addressed over and over again. And yes, we do have politicians that finally have the conviction and the will to actually go after these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny. So Rich, I saw you laugh when he said there are people on the Zoom that was around, and he wasn't. Yeah, I saw Rich just start laughing.
Well, Rich wasn't my intended target, but that was a shotgun approach.
And I think it's also important to really understand, right, just the appraisal and the home ownership piece, how it's impacted, again, to what Kim was just talking about, how it's impacted here today, right? So when you think about from 1925 to about 1965, 66, somewhere that, right, the U.S. government underwrote about $200 billion in lending for home ownership, right? Now, the government's investment in that realistically was about offering low and no interest home loans, right, for white Americans. Minorities did not have access to that, right? So back then, when you think about it, you could buy a house for between $3,000 to $5,000, right? you take that same house today, right, and get the appraised value, we're probably looking at, in this market, $400,000. So that's the amount of wealth that's been able to transfer from generation to generation for non-minorities that minorities have not had access to. So on average, annually, you think about, there's about a $330 billion disparity between Blacks and white families in the annual flow of wealth, right? Of that, 60% comes from intergenerational transfers, right? So the gap in it, so when you talk about those intergenerational transfers, those inheritances, there's a gap between Black and white recipients that's estimated of about $200 billion annually, right? So just when you think about why we are where we are and why some individuals have access to certain things and other individuals don't, and certain individuals aren't qualified, can't get qualified, right? There are a number of different factors, and some of them are personal, but we also need to make sure that we are always cognizant of, right, the historic issues, the systemic and institutional racism that has caused us to be where we are today.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. I think we really delved into that, that bill very well. I'm looking forward to the outcome of the research when the task force does report its findings and the result of that. So, you know, if everybody's ready, I'd like to move on to the next bill that we're going to be talking about, which is the, and Erica Madden is going to be leading the discussion on this one. It's the House Bill 1095, which is residential property. The residential contract of sale, this bill didn't pass. So I'll just pass on to Erica so that she can talk about this bill.
Thank you all. So I think it's important, we're discussing a bill that did not pass, but I think, you know, as Steve said, as Cleveland said, I think as everybody has mentioned, I think it's important to understand bills that have not passed, to see what is going on and what people are looking at. Is there something that is an issue that's at the forefront that the legislation's intent is to, you know, remediate through legislation? And then as realtors or as just community members, it's staying on top of it and then deciding how, you know, whether you want to advocate for it or if it's a bill you don't want to advocate. I discussed this in my legislative update class. I think it's important to understand what's going on in the legislature so that you can understand what it is you want to advocate for. So what this bill that again did not pass was saying was that it would authorize buyers to sign a real estate contract without using their legal name. And that the intent of the bill was to mask the buyer's identity so that the seller would not be able to discriminate against the buyer based on assumptions made about the buyer's protected class status. Protected class status in that case, you know, the fear being that, you know, the buyer would be discriminated based on, you know, their ethnicity, their race, essentially, or their gender, based on how that contract is being completed. And, you know, I've been approached from a legal perspective. I mean, there's many times where I've been asked, you know, can I shield my identity? The only legislation I know that's on the book for shielding identity, and it's more for actually the recording of the deed and not for the preparation of the contract, is there's a bill or address confidentiality for victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. But again, even that, the contract is still in their name. So it's going towards a different kind of aspect of why someone want their name shielded. In this case, I do see the value in it. I do understand why they're trying to do it. I hate to say it this way, but I don't doubt that that's occurring. That people may see a name and say, well, I don't want to sell this house because of this person's, like I said, race, gender, ethnicity. At the same time, this bill understandably did not pass because again, how can I sign and enter into a legal document if I'm not going to sign my name or use my name? So I think on its face, it was a little raw legislation, but I think it is, you know, something that, you know, is going to probably be reintroduced over the years, or looking at, okay, how can we handle real estate or enter into real estate transactions and somehow shield the seller from knowing that information or keep them from making that decision. And, you know, I'll pass it to anyone else. I know Cleveland, to put you on the spot, but I know, you know, you had mentioned it yesterday, we were discussing with these, is that, you know, a lot of the fair housing is that the laws that we're putting in place are kind of to stop you from making the discriminate or from being discriminatory. But at a certain point, it's maybe the education needs to be, don't be discriminatory. I don't know, I'll let you kind of, Cleveland, say that much better and more eloquently than I did, but but I think that's, you know, that we're just kind of glossing over the issue by saying, well, we're going to protect you from making that decision by blocking the person's name. There's got to be a different way to approach it.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Erica. I think, you know, part of our conversation yesterday really kind of goes back to accountability. You know, what we talked about was that, you know, in this industry, we have to be willing to, again, as I keep saying, hold each other accountable, right? So preventing individuals from either disclosing information or because of fear that someone's going to discriminate against them, right? I don't believe is how we should operate. I think that we should operate in a system that says if you disclose information and someone uses that in discriminatory fashion to discriminate against you, then we should hold them accountable. If they violate the Fair Housing Act, then they should be held accountable. And this goes in a number of different arenas, right? We talked about the love letters a little bit as well. It's simply about ensuring that instead of holding people accountable, it appears as that we're somewhat taking a different approach, right? That we're going to prevent individuals from disseminating information that individuals are going to use against them. Instead of saying that if individuals are using that information against you in a discriminatory way, then we should, in my opinion, be holding them accountable. That's one way to avoid people from violating the Fair Housing Act, is to see people getting held accountable to the Fair Housing Act. So I just like to see a significant increase in accountability, which I think addresses some of the issues that we're talking about.
And I'd like to mention too that I did learn something from Erica Madden when this came up in another webinar that we were doing, or maybe during the Fair Housing when we had one of our meetings. Because the problem was with one of the issues that came up was the seller was presented with several offers, and one of them, the offer said that the buyer's offer's name was Ebony, and so the seller asked the agent, "Is Ebony African American? Is she Black?" And so because of this situation, it actually, I believe it turned out to be an actual suit case, you know, to someone who was affected by this in the Midwest area. I don't have the exact location, but when the situation came up, I think I brought it up to Erica, and it was another agent that did too. What would you do in a situation like that to prevent that type of, you know, how would an agent handle that? You know, when we're holding our sellers accountable to not discriminating, you know, against someone. And so that's, you know, a question I'd like to throw out there. And also, you know, what Erica suggested, I'll say this, is that that I actually was my takeaway was, you know, if I was in that situation, well, I would present to my seller all of the basic facts, you know, about the offer, and then have my seller to make a decision based on the basic facts. Sooner or later, we know the issue is that they're going to see the name. So, but if anybody else wants to expound on that type of situation, you know, how would you hold your seller accountable? And, you know, what actions would a realtor do?
So, sorry, Erica.
I was just going to expand on with Kim. I mean, I do say that's what I've heard some agents have done. Just create the chart with the facts, pick which contract, but again, be careful in that also, because you don't want to interpret or leave something out. So it's, you know, they are entitled. Another way could simply be, and this just kind of occurred to me, so I'm going to pop it out there, you know, white out their name. You know, I mean, yeah. That's another way. If you want to take that precaution, it has the same kind of goals as, you know, I think the legislation was trying to do, which is you don't see the name. So maybe as the agent, go through and just, you know, redact or white out every time, you know, the buyer's name is written, and then tell present those to the seller, the different contracts, so that they see everything except for the name. And if,
Right.
and then, so they're making their choice in that aspect. Again, I think that's probably the closest is what you could get to what the legislation was trying to impart. Again, I think where Cleveland said, I think the most important part of fair housing is you do it once, you better do it every single time. So if you're gonna do that one time, be prepared to do it for every contract you present to every seller for pretty much the rest of your career.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rich.
No, it presented, some issues and some challenges to the lending community in that a pre-approval letter, a pre-qualification letter is always required. And where we're pulling credit, and these letters generally come out of our system after input of all sorts of information, including the borrower's name, et cetera, where they live and whatnot. And that's a real challenge. I mean, it would cause companies and we submit those loans to automated underwriting, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And so we have to put the information in and then take the information out. Whereas in the contract, you're not even putting it in per se, but it caused a lot of discussion amongst the mortgage banking community as to how it could practically work to accomplish, what you were trying to accomplish, yet have us in compliance with what we have to do as lenders.
But I think also, Kim, to your question, that's where as agents we come in, right? Because most of the time our clients feel comfortable enough with us to talk about the offers and why they're selecting a particular offer, right? At that point in time, the agent should be educating their client on fair housing if it potentially appears to be they're making a decision based off of a protected category, right? That is a conversation that as agents, we have to be willing to have with our clients. So we talk about that accountability piece. All money is not good money, right? And that we need to ensure and be willing to walk away if our client insists on being discriminatory. Because one of the things that we all need to understand is, again, from an agent perspective, is that you're on the hook as well, right? So if your client makes a decision and you relay that information, right, and that transaction, someone's denied an opportunity because they're a member of a protected class, you as the realtor have now also violated the Fair Housing Act as well. So when that complaint gets filed, is your name going to be on that complaint? The broker's name is going to be on that complaint. The other realtor, right, who lost the transaction can also be a complainant because of their loss of commission, because of your client's discriminatory actions, right? They've now lost commission. So they actually now have a right to file a complaint against the seller and yourself as the agent as well. So again, I can't say it enough. It is important for us as agents to educate our clients. It's not, so when we engage in these conversations, if something appears not to be right, there's a time for us to step in as the experts in this industry and educate them on the Fair Housing Act to make sure that they understand what they can and cannot do as it relates to making a decision as it pertains to an offer.
And I think it's important to understand, and then I know Steve, you want to say, but I think it's important to understand as well when educating them that it's not just, okay, you broke the law, like whatever. It's criminal and civil penalties that are associated, and the civil penalties are not minimal. They are significant. And again, everybody is open to that. So it's understanding to a seller, it's not that you're just going to get a slap on the wrist for taking a discriminatory action. It is a major issue, major fines, and again, could potentially criminal as well. So it's important to explain that as well. But Steve, I'll pass it to you.
So I also think it's important that we talk about the genesis of this. And very simply, in 2021, there was a buyer in a multiple offer situation who felt that her name indicated her ethnicity and potentially indicated, and that's why they didn't get the offer. Now, we don't know anything more than that, except for what is in the written testimony that's filed with House Bill, I think it was 1095 in 2021. The broker, multiple agents, they all testified in that they felt that this was the case. Now, I'll be the fly in the ointment for just a moment here. You have to prove that this was the case. Now, if the seller went to their agent and said, I'm not accepting this person's offer because of this, it is a clear fair housing violation. However, in a multiple offer situation, you got to be able to prove it at that point. So that's part one. Now, the second bill that came forward in 2022 incorporated victims of abuse, both sexual and otherwise, into this. And interestingly enough, in the 1095 in 2021, the Attorney General's office actually submitted testimony that was not in favor of this. And their exact wording was, the fact that a buyer in a residential real estate transaction involving single-family real property is not purchasing a house for the buyer's own personal use or is a shell corporation could be a material fact that a reasonable seller would consider in deciding whether to proceed with the transaction. So in the committee, one of the sticking points that we uncovered very simply was, and I know Rich and Erica were a party to these conversations, the issue is now we have these large investment firms that are coming in and buying up whole neighborhoods. Now, a lot of folks don't want to sell to them. And unfortunately, if they're allowed to become buyer A or buyer one, then we don't know. We don't know as an agent. The seller doesn't know. And if the seller doesn't want to sell to a corporation, well, fair housing doesn't apply at that point. So it creates a big can of worms that this will come up again. And I'm sure that we will see another variation of this next year. But ultimately, there's a lot of problems with this legislation. One of the suggestions that came from Maryland Realtors back to the legislative committee was, if we were to amend this, how would you like to see that? And we dug our heels in and said, no, we don't want to. But the suggestion being that in the case of a multiple offer form, the sponsor of the bill suggested, well, if we have a multiple offer form and instead of it saying Erica, Kim, Kimberly, Cleveland, and Rich, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's that. And well, the issue is now we're obligated by both Code of Ethics, which is also Maryland state law, to present all contracts as soon as possible. So we're not actually presenting the contract at that point. So it's an evolving thing. It's something that we're going to have to continue to work on. And we're going to see it come up again next session, most likely. It'll probably have different language and there may be a balance that can be struck. But back to the entire topic of conversation, as Erica said, if you're going to start whiting out people's names on contracts to present them clean in that respect, be ready to do it for every single contract for the rest of your career, because the fastest way to find yourself in trouble is to be inconsistent.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm looking forward to see how this is going to develop, over the next year. Please keep me updated, with the latest and greatest on this bill, because, I realize that it's going to be very challenging based on what Rich has said. And, so yeah, thank you all for your insight on that bill, and so I look forward to it. As we move on to the next one, it's the the House Bill 1213. Rich Green is going to speak on this one. It deals with the financial institutions. This bill did pass. Determination of credit worthiness to include rules and alternate methods. So, Rich, you want to take this one over and
Sure.
what this bill is about?
The mortgage industry has been through a lot and come a long way. Rewind back to the mortgage crisis in 2008, 2009, when there was no doc loans, liar loans, call them what you want, but in the end, it resulted in Dodd-Frank and coming out with things like the ability and willingness to repay. And those things have not gone away. But lenders the lenders are in the business to make loans. And, we work with the information that we have, and the cornerstone, again, is ability and willingness to repay. That said, the industry, this bill was introduced in 2020, I think it was, and it went into effect October 1st, 2021. And it really is based on lenders accepting alternative documentation to assist in the ability to approve mortgages that they might not otherwise approve. It asks, or when it first was proposed, the language was when determining whether to accept an application. And that was fought long and hard by the credit unions, by the bankers and the mortgage bankers, because we have to, under federal law, we have to accept every application. We don't have to approve every application, but we have to accept them. And so after, much negotiating with Delegate Queen and lobbyists for the mortgage bankers and the credit union association, we got the word changed to evaluate. And evaluate then allows the lender to consider alternative documentation, as is mentioned in this bill. That would include analyzing history of rent or mortgage payments, history of utility payments, school attendance and work attendance, and anything else that the applicant wanted to provide to demonstrate their creditworthiness, potentially in the absence of a credit score or not enough credit or things like that. The fact is that lenders have been considering that all along. Anybody could have always done that. Rent payments are generally not reported to a credit bureau, but mortgage payments always are. Borrowers can submit anything that they choose to that supports their case to potentially turn a negative decision into a positive decision. And we welcome that, always have welcomed that. But here's the challenge on that. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have automated underwriting systems. You're all aware of that, known as DU and LP. And those loans must be approved in order for a lender to consider them. So they get an accept recommendation or they don't. And if they get a refer recommendation, there isn't a lender that I know of out there that will overturn that and make that loan. On the flip side, if it's an FHA or a VA loan, we are allowed to take that decision and do a manual underwrite and consider this information. And we would consider this information. But the borrower, when they present it to us, needs to, it needs to be whole and accurate. And, we can't take the utility bills from 2 years ago, as opposed to, which was a good year versus last year, which wasn't a good year kind of thing. But we are, as an industry, we want to make loans. But we want to make them to people that can demonstrate the ability to repay. So we're not quite sure, school attendance implies, training, education that would allow them to make a living to qualify. But everybody's, is going to be evaluated the same way, essentially, by automated underwriting. And until that changes, and I don't think it ever will, coming out of the crisis that we had in 2008, 2009. That's where this bill came from. So it was very well intended. It was opposed by all of the groups until we got the word changed from accepting an application to evaluating it. We then, in turn, at the mortgage bankers, supported that legislation. I testified and wrote the opinion letter to do that. It's very, very well intended. One of the things that I think a lot of folks don't realize is that this section only applies to banking institutions, credit unions, savings and loans, and credit grantors regulated under Title 11 of this article. What that is state institutions. So the federal savings and loans or banks chartered, incorporated outside of the state of Maryland are not subject to this. which I think people don't realize, but it doesn't, I don't think personally it matters, because I think if a bank can do it and can make the loan and justify making the loan, they're going to make the loan. As we always have, but it does not apply to out-of-state institutions. So independent mortgage bankers, anybody licensed by the state as a lender in the state is required to comply with this. And really, that's all the state can do. The state, there's plenty of things that are involved, and obviously the long arms of the state just can't reach federal requirements. But it's well intended. It's a good law. If it helps us to make more loans than we will. But again, at the same time, it really does eliminate its use in conventional loans to the majority of lenders that are making loans in the state, mostly because of the restrictions of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the secondary mortgage market. Surprise, right?
Well, does anyone have any comments they'd like to make? We're moving along with our evening here, and I want to make sure we have time to pull everything to a closure. But I would like to give any of our guests here an opportunity to comment on Rich's information on this legislation. No comments on it. Okay, well.
Kimberly's shaking her head because she understands it as a lender. That we really, our hands are tied to a large degree, other than the FHA and VA loans, where we do have that latitude. But I might add that, the introduction of this material into a file it's got to be very strong for an underwriter to, want to overturn a computer automated underwriting decision, artificial intelligence, as it were. It's got to be very strong.
Well, we do know that, we could talk about source of income, which is one of the protective classes that I know that Erica had mentioned once before, that's been added to Maryland's list of protected classes. And I know that this doesn't have to do much with loans. I would personally like to look more into why it was even brought. The law was passed. So, and it's an effort to prohibit discrimination in lending. And so I think we'll need to have a little longer time to look and see what the effects are of this law. And
yeah, I'm not so sure, Kim, that it's designed to prohibit discrimination as much as it is just give alternative methods to potentially assist all borrowers, regardless of ethnicity or whatever. Lenders we're looking at, for every borrower, pay stubs, W-2s, income, assets, and the ability to repay. Mm-hmm. We can use some of these things to develop further credit, but a pay stub is a pay stub and a W-2 is a W-2. And if that, you have to demonstrate the ability to repay to get a loan.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the big thing. It's the ability to repay after the housing crisis. We federal government put into CFPB, put a lot of criteria, a lot of stipulations on lenders and how we have to do things. We were really on the hook for everything when it came to the housing crisis. So there's a lot of change that we had to do on our end in our industry. And so that's what we have to look at.
And really, the loans we make, we want housing to be sustainable.
Right.
That's the bottom line. We don't want to put anybody into anything that's going to wind up in foreclosure, short sale, or anything. The ability, sustainability is doing the right thing.
The whole point is to avoid what we already went through before.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
what we went through before was predatory lending practices, and so we can open.
Well,
up-
it was, but you know, if you could breathe, you could get a loan.
Yeah.
I'm
Right,
not suggesting that it
the
wasn't.
predatory lending was part of it, but
Yeah.
there's another piece of it where there was no identifying who could make the payments in the
Right.
proper way. There were programs out there that didn't require pay stubs and W-2s and tax returns, and you just got a loan. So there was no stipulations for that ability to pay piece.
It became predatory based on the pricing and the fees, not on getting somebody in the door. And that was wrong, and we learned how wrong that was, and it nearly melted down, you know, the entire real estate industry for a period of time.
Yes, it did.
They will not go back there.
Kimberly and Rich, just so kind of give a little bit of context there. Back in the 90s, when a lot of the legislation that started to activate what became the Great Recession was enacted, the push was to broaden the ability of people to obtain mortgages. And so as a result, the best intentions, well, that's what paves the road to hell. And we saw it firsthand. I was a victim of the recession. I lost my job in 2008 because the business I was working for was going under because it could not sustain. And it was not even in the real estate industry at the time, at that particular point in my life. So it has very long-reaching ramifications. And if I understand what the two of you are saying from the banking industry side is, if we keep the standards fairly consistent and we ensure that everybody is getting the same consistent treatment, then we are both abiding by fair housing law, which is of course the focus of this seminar, but more importantly, we're making sure that the economy remains strong, the housing industry remains strong, and that we don't have another 2008 all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. And you know, automated underwriting doesn't know who you are. I mean, everybody is the same.
Well, I thank you all for your contribution. You know, it's a great deal of information that you've shared with us today. We have definitely, you know, looked at the intended consequences or what we expected the bill to produce, and whether the bill is passed or didn't pass. You know, so I'd like to take a look at right now any of the questions that you know, any of our viewers right now may have that like to bring up to our guest that's on the panel. Danielle or Kimberly, do you see them as well?
I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay. So before we move on.
A hand just went up.
Oh, a hand went up? Okay. Let's see. Where is that?
Pete, don't forget to
Oh,
put it in
Pete,
the chat.
okay. Okay. Do you see the question? I don't see his question.
I don't see a question.
Oh, it was a mistake.
Just said oops.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
that's
Well,
okay, Pete.
So in closing, I want to express our deepest appreciation. Deepest appreciation to our fair housing sponsors this month and their dedication and commitment to social justice. On behalf of the HCAR Fair Housing Committee, we thank you for your generous sponsorship towards our fair housing activities during the month of April. I am grateful for your humbleness, your willingness, and your selfless support that made us achieve more than we ever imagined. And if I would find the right words, we would not have been able to provide such a quality event if it were not for you. You made the difference, and I thank you for your support. I would also like to thank our colleagues for partnering with us on this momentous event. Cleveland Horton, Chair of the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Committee, Steve Miller, Legislative Committee Chair, Erica Madden, Attorney at Law with Universal Title, Rich Green, Legislative Committee Member and President of Bank Mortgage, You've all demonstrated the courage to step up and raise the issues that that needed to be addressed, and to share your knowledge that we can take back to our practices. I'd like to thank the Howard County Association of Realtors, all of the members of the Fair Housing Committee, and HCAR staff members for your hard work and your dedication and commitment to social justice as it relates to fair housing and an equitable society. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone that attended, because it just shows that you care and you want to learn. So I'm moving this forward to, I wish I had a drum roll, 5:30. We are supposed to be talking about, and maybe I moved a little too fast, our Fairhaven Challenge prize drawing. That should be up now.
Yeah, skipping down to the challenge here. If you've completed the Fairhaven simulation game, then you're submitted automatically into the drawing. There's still time because we are doing drawings all week. We did Monday, Tuesday, today is Wednesday. We are giving away a Blue Magic swag bag. It's got all this blue logo swag in a Realtor logo bag as well. Tomorrow we're doing a Pretty in Pink drawing. So there's actually like a little Realtor pink necklace, hat, water bottle, and bag as well. And then our grand prize drawing is actually moved to Monday. We're going to extend it a little bit, get everyone a chance to complete Fairhaven. So Monday, May 2nd at 5 p.m. we're doing the grand prize drawing. Von Paris Moving and Storage has donated a suite to their Camden Yards at Camden Yards on June 22nd. So just 2 tickets to the suite, and then of course you're joining the Von Paris team and their guests for networking, food, drinks, snacks, and of course baseball.
Oh boy. So how will we find, so you're going to put the winners for those drawings on the HCAR website?
Actually put it they've all been Facebook Live, and I'm gonna do the drawing now, but
Want the drum roll?
I
found a drum roll sound.
Like the little noise.
That was me.
And let's go. Anita Castell, out of 55, you have won the Blue Magic Realtor swag bag. Okay. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
You can definitely come by the office and pick it up. And this webinar will be available to view on Facebook sometime in the next couple days with our closed captioning available. And have a good, that's done for me. Have a good night, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you again, everyone.
Now.
Thank you.
Thank you,